be here. The subject of this conversation is leadership, but the unit of analysis is you. I've spent the last quarter century or so thinking about leadership, talking to people like you, wondering why you and I don't exercise leadership more often than we do. So, in order to think about that today and share with you some thoughts, I'd like to ask you to do a little favor for me. Think about some aspiration that you have for your family, for your community, for your organization, for your nation, for a group of people with whom you're connected. Some aspiration you have for some group of human beings. And think about the current reality. And I want you to think about that gap between your aspiration and the current reality. That gap represents a leadership opportunity. And I'd like you to consider, as we talk for the next 15 minutes or so, what you can do to close that gap. What you can do to make progress in moving from the current reality to get closer to your aspiration. I'd like to begin by telling you a story. My interest here is trying to think about why people don't exercise leadership more often than they do, why you don't, why I don't, and to try to use those insights as a way of helping us, each of us, me very much included, exercise leadership more often than we do. The story is about Rudy Giuliani. Everybody remember Rudy Giuliani? How quickly they forget, right? Well, those of us from New York, or who follow politics closely, will remember that on September 10th, 2001, Rudy Giuliani's reputation was in the pits. It was just awful. He had 3.5 months left on his term as mayor before he was going to be term limited and had to leave office. He had announced his divorce to his wife on television. That's how she found out about it. He had dropped out of the Senate campaign. His relationships with people of color in the city of New York were just terrible. It was awful. People could not wait to get rid of him. And then 2011, 9/11 happened. And it was the perfect situation for Rudy Giuliani. He did what we want our mayors, our presidents, our people in authority, mom and dad, to do when we're in trouble. And that is three things. He was present for us. He was there at the scene. He felt our pain. And he calmed us down. And those functions of people in authority, providing direction and protection and order, are the same for any person in authority. They're the same for mom and dad in a house, in a home. They're the same for a CEO of a company. They're the same for the President of the United States. It's what we expect people in authority to do. It's very important work, the work of authority, providing direction, protection, and order. But it has nothing to do with leadership. Nothing to do with leadership. It is a different kind of work. Very important. No organization of human beings could survive or thrive without it. But it has nothing to do with leadership. Now, roll the story forward about 6 weeks or so to, say, November 1st. On November 1st, Rudy Giuliani had accumulated more political capital than any politician in my lifetime. Rudy Giuliani could have been elected Pope on November 1st, right? And what did he do with that political capital? he did three things. He tried to extend his term limit time as mayor. He squashed an investigation of looking into why New York wasn't better prepared. And he wrote a book called, anybody remember the name of his book? Leadership. Right? Now just imagine if Rudy Giuliani had taken that opportunity, that enormous amount of political capital he had accumulated, and decided to help this country, and the whole world for that matter, face up to a new reality that was represented by 9/11. Help us try to understand how the world was different than the world we were used to. Help us try to think about how we were going to change our behaviors, our way of looking at things, because the times were different. But what he said to us is what we wanted to hear. He said, you go, do your thing, do your jobs, go to restaurants, enjoy yourself, go to Disneyland. We'll take care of the bad guys. We'll go get the bad guys for you. Right? Which is exactly what we want mom and dad to do. Exactly what we want people in authority to do. Now, this story represents to me the beginnings of an insight about why people don't exercise leadership more often than they do. Because leadership is a risky activity. And Rudy Giuliani wanted to run for president. And if he had begun to engage us in that kind of a conversation, he would have put his prospects for running as president at risk. Turns out they were already at risk, but he didn't know that yet. So I want to think about the difference between what we expect of people in authority and leadership. Let me use us as an example here. My assumption is that each of you has some expectation about what I'm supposed to do in the next 10 or 12 minutes that I have with you. And if I asked you to complete the sentence, I expect Marty to, you'd be able to complete that sentence. Some people would say educate, stimulate, entertain, share some insights, tell some stories. They would be all around the same thing. But everybody would have some expectation. And so one way of thinking about my job is that I've got to figure out what you expect of me and to deliver it, and if I'm any good, to deliver it at a high level of competence. And if I can do that, if I can figure out what you expect of me and I can deliver it to you at a high level of competence, you'll be happy, you'll write good evaluations, Sally will be happy, TEDx will be happy, I'll get my expenses reimbursed, the world will work fine, right? And I think that's the way organizational life works. I think that's the way family life works. We figure out what is expected of us, and we try to deliver it at a high level of competence, and we get rewarded for that. And we get rewarded in whatever the coin of the realm is. The coin of the realm here is those things that I was talking about. Good evaluations, I get my expenses reimbursed, Sally feels good about the event, TEDx feels good about the event, everybody is happy. Right? One of the most pernicious ways that we reward people in organizational life for never exercising leadership is by calling them leaders. It's a way of keeping people right where we want them. Now let's say, this is a silly little hypothetical just to illustrate what I'm trying to suggest. Let's say I decided halfway through this conversation that what this group needed to learn about leadership was for me to go down, is it Greg? Chip. I used to be able to read that far, but not a chance anymore. And then I would go down to Chip, take his glasses off, and punch him in the face. Right? That's what I thought this group needed to learn about leadership. What would happen in that moment? Now let's assume two things, both very problematic. One, at my age, very problematic, that it was a good punch. Let's assume that. And second, I didn't pick the one person in the room that everybody wanted me to punch. Okay. Okay.
And you wouldn't get reimbursed.
Right. I wouldn't get reimbursed, which is the metaphor. I would get taken out. I wouldn't spend one other minute on this platform. Now that silly little metaphor suggests to me one of the most important reasons why you and I don't exercise leadership more often than we do. Because we understand that it is risky and dangerous work. We understand that people who do exercise leadership, people who try to tell people what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear, get themselves in trouble. Leadership is dangerous activity. And one of the reasons we conflate, we put together leadership and authority, is so we don't get people pushing on those boundaries, upsetting us, making us feel uncomfortable. Now, the other idea that I want to think about and surface here is what kinds of problems require an exercise of leadership. Because there are a lot of problems for which the exercise of authority is exactly what we want. We want people in authority to tell us what to do and tell us what our role is and to protect us from the outside world and to keep things calm. But there are a set of problems, certain kinds of problems, which require a different kind of activity, a different kind of way of being in the world. You see, I believe from my experience and observation that leadership has nothing to do with position. You can exercise leadership from any position, in any organization or outside of organization. I never use the word leader because I think of leadership as an activity, as a behavior, as one person stepping into a situation involving a bunch of other human beings for some purpose. And so what we're talking about now is what are those kinds of situations that require an exercise of leadership, require, in order to make progress, you're stepping out there, you're taking those risks. And the kinds of problems to me that require that are what I think of as problems that require adaptation. Let me give you my favorite current illustration of an adaptive challenge. This is a story about my mother. My mother is 97 years old. She lives alone in a high-rise apartment building just outside of Boston. She doesn't do so well with a computer, so my guess is that she'll never be able to hear me tell this story on YouTube. But she's really amazing. She's 97 years old. She does crossword puzzles. She goes to theater. She plays bridge 2 times a week. It used to be 3 times a week, but one of the games wasn't good enough for her, so she quit it. She doesn't have a gray hair in her head, except a couple of years ago she dyed, a highlight. She dyed a highlight in her hair, a gray highlight, so people would know that she didn't dye her hair. She still drives, and she still drives at night. And about 1.5 years ago, her car began accumulating more and more scrapes. Not big, humongous dents, just little scrapes, noticeable scrapes. Now, my mother is a very, very bright woman. She knows intellectually in her head the risks of her driving. When you talk to her about her driving, she'll say things like, oh, it's not so bad, I just keep my eye on the white line. But when you talk to her for maybe 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 30 seconds, what you immediately understand is that for her to stop driving would rip part of her heart out. Her identity is as a 97-year-old woman who still drives and drives at night. And she is the only person she knows in that category. It's as if it was all, her name was all one word. Ruth Linsky, who drives at night, right? Right? One word. Right? And for her to, she knows how to stop driving and she knows how to fix the dents in the car. She doesn't, it's a classic kind of technical problem. It's beyond her competence. Like when you break your arm, I assume there are no doctors in this room, but there might be. You break your arm, that's beyond your competence technically. It's a very complex problem, but every one of us in this room knows how to access someone for whom it's standard operating procedure. Same thing with dents in a car. But that's not where the problem lies. In adaptive work and adaptive problems, they live between here and here. Technical work lives up here. Adaptive work lives in people's hearts, stomachs, guts, and belief systems. You know, sometimes when you're in a country that people don't speak your language, you think if you talk slower, they will understand, right? Or if you talk louder, they will understand. The problem is not that they don't understand, the problem is that they don't get the language. And for you to communicate with them, you have to do it differently than the way you normally converse. So for my mother to stop driving would require a huge adaptation. Now, what makes adaptation difficult? If you think about plants and animals, and how they adapt. What happens when a plant or animal adapts, when a species adapts, is they lose part of their DNA. After all, our DNA is 96% the same as chimpanzees. And that 4% is really, really important, but it's only 4%. When a plant or animal evolves, part of their DNA is left behind in order to make room for something new. Leadership is difficult because it is about the distribution of loss. When you are asking people to adapt to a new reality, you're asking them to give up something that is important to them, that's worked for them, that is part of who they are and what makes them feel comfortable in life. When an organization has to change, you're asking people to give up some way of being, some product line, some service, some function that was important to get them where they are. Leading adaptive change is difficult because it is about the distribution of loss. And the opportunity that represents when you are trying to lead change in your family, in your community, in your organization, in your civic life, in your religious life, wherever you're functioning with a group of human beings, is to begin to understand the resistance that you're getting, not as a function of people not getting it, but because people do get it, and they don't like it. Your brilliant idea doesn't sound so brilliant to them because it threatens something that's important to them. The reason that I wanted to talk about this is because we spend too much time talking about the inspirational parts of leadership and not enough time talking about the perspirational parts. And I think that's one of the reasons that we don't exercise leadership more often than we do. We are in an extraordinary period of time. We are all living in an extraordinary period of time. A period of rapid change, tremendous uncertainty, requiring us to make decisions based on inadequate information, and that's just as true in your family as it is in your country. And it is a time in which the world needs you to exercise leadership more often than you do. So whether you're a person who takes advantage of 5% of the opportunities or 50% of the opportunities to exercise leadership, because I think the opportunities come before each of us every day. The challenge is how you can get that 5% up to 7%, how you can get that 50% up to 52%. The world and the people who you live with and play with or function with need you to do that. Thank you very, very much.